Welcome to the Consulting Psychologists Beyond the Session. I'm Dr. Marshall Bewley,
And I'm Dr. Carrie Leavell.
and we are two licensed psychologists in the state of Texas. Together, we explore private practice realities, consultation-focused topics that include clinical decision-making, ethics to professional growth, and how to sustain a meaningful career in psychology.
Because what happens beyond the session shapes what happens in it.
Yes.
We're very excited because we received our first direct inquiry of something to discuss in the podcast. And so we decided that today is the day for being able to do that. And so we are so thankful for that community member who reached out directly, and know that we will always try to incorporate your points in here. And if we can't, we'll certainly let you know why we wouldn't be able to. But without further ado, this inquiry specifically was around managed care organizations, kind of navigating the insurance maze, which is a book title that is not mine. And I want to be, disclaimer around that, but navigating insurance from two real people in the field. And so that's where we were going to go today.
Yeah, it's a great topic. And if you have other questions that you want to submit, you can do that at theconsultingpsychologist@gmail.com. So we welcome further questions, but it's a great conversation because, I think in private practice, considering whether you're going to be part of managed care and take insurance, I think comes up for most private practitioners. And I guess maybe we can start there, kind of what goes into our decision making to decide to both take insurance in our practices.
Yep. I want to say first, there is no right answer here, because I think, are you insurance or you self-pay only? Like, there is a lot of division in the field around this. And I hope that this can be a conversation that helps to bridge that divide a little bit, because as an insurance-based provider for 10 years now, I don't look back and I don't judge anybody else. I do what I do because of how it is in alignment with my values, and it's what helps me feel my best. And so I do want to create some space out here that there's lots of ways to do this. And if you're on the non or even anti-insurance side, I hope you still give us a listen so that you can allow it to maybe reaffirm your decision, or maybe it gives you some fodder for further thought down the way. So I want to put that caveat out there for sure.
So you're saying that things happen in the gray, not in a black and
I'm
white.
saying that there's a lot that goes on beyond that session. Yes.
Yeah. No, but that's a good point, because I think, there are a lot of ethical ways to practice that don't involve taking insurance. So
Absolutely.
the listeners that have that, you're giving them a shout out.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So let's start with talking about why we have chosen to accept insurance in the respective ways that we do. Will you start us off?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, for me, I think one of the biggest things was just working in a college counseling center environment, getting to work with people before private practice that, didn't have many funds and ability to kind of access services. I knew when I went to private practice, I wanted to be able to still work with clients from all socioeconomic backgrounds. And insurance does significantly increase the likelihood of someone receiving care. And in fact, in terms of the US, insured adults are far more likely to receive mental health treatment than uninsured adults. And there was actually a national survey that found that the lack of insurance is one of the strongest predictors of unmet mental health needs. So I know for me, that was a big part of it, is like I wanted to be sure that I could help people that need help.
That's so interesting. Those stats are really interesting. To add on to that, at a conference last week, I might get these stats wrong, so I'll put something in the chat if I'm too far off base. But it was something like 50 to 60, maybe even 70% of American adults had a mental health issue in the past year, and something like only 20% maybe more, maybe a little bit more, but maybe even a little bit less, actually received any kind of treatment for that, whether it be therapy or treatment through their PCP or psychiatry through medication. 20%, give or take, of the people experiencing a mental health issue in the past year received any kind of treatment, which is, again, I think I've used this phrase before in a podcast together. That's wild. And I think that's spelt SAD. It's really sad to think that so many people don't maybe get the support that they need to have a life that's healthy. So I appreciate that that's what brought you into it. As you were talking, I was thinking about this story. I never intended to be a private practice psychologist. Let me start there. But I also didn't start out with the idea that I would take insurance. Interestingly enough, whenever I was talking to my mom about my plans to start private practice and that I was going to be, self-pay only, she said something to me that's clearly stuck. And she said, well, but not accepting insurance will miss a lot of people. And I, again, at the time, probably didn't think about it that much, but not in this moment, I'm thinking about just my background growing up and both of my parents being, you know, being laborers, right? Like they had blue collar jobs, and how insurance would have been the entry point for us and my family should we have pursued mental health therapy at any point. And so, it stuck with me, and clearly I pursued insurance for reasons that I'll talk more about, but that's just coming up for me in the moment about how maybe we don't always think this is part of our plan until it becomes it, and that's okay. And it's maybe not part of our plan that we get off of it, and some people do, and that's okay too.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember consulting with several people in private practice already, and all of them, including you, were taking insurance. And I remember thinking it was sort of this like, no, like, ooh, the scary beast that you don't want to have part of your practice. And what I found was people who were taking insurance were like, it works for me.
Mm-hmm.
And, I don't find it to be this beast as long as I practice in a way that is ethically informed. And I think we're going to talk about that. But
Mm-hmm.
I do think that there's a little bit of stigma in terms of
Mm-hmm.
taking insurance in your practice.
I think there's stigma mostly from other mental health professionals. I
Hmm.
also think that stigma, like stigma anywhere, is informed by the unknown. And ignorance is not a dirty word. It's just a word that says that we are uninformed about something. And I do think that for all of us, that ignorance can be a barrier to being open to something different or approaching uh, approaching even getting a better understanding about whether or not it's a good fit for you.
Yeah. Those darn what if scenarios that are just so catastrophic and scary.
Uh-huh, exactly. What if this happens? Yeah. So, let's see. You, so clearly that comment from my mom contributed to insurance. And then also, whenever it became clear for me that I would be leaving my agency position to pursue private practice full time, I will also be transparent that I think that there was also fear about, would I be able to fill a caseload and would I be able to make a reasonable living that way? And so I do think that I saw insurance as a referral stream. And there
Hmm.
was a little bit of fear based, but that's okay. I think that that's reasonable. I don't think that, I think many people might pursue insurance initially because of that. And I also, it was like, oh, maybe this will help me have more security, financial security, and a consistent caseload. But also, let me just try it. Let me try pursuing one insurance and see how that goes. And that's how I did it. I was doing it all by myself. I didn't have a credentialer or anything like that. I just did it the good old fashioned way, step by step and TDM by TDM. And it's not a hard process or difficult one. It's just a tedious one. And what I've told people before is you've done harder things by getting your degree. right? Whether it's writing a dissertation or all of the, case presentations that we give, or even for various kinds of clinicians, some people need 3,000 supervised hours, right? And that is an incredible feat. So you've done harder things, I assure. But I think also I had some really good experiences with people on the support side of the insurance who were probably kinder than most and coaching me through and hand holding me a little bit. So I'll call that luck of the draw and good timing in that way.
Yeah.
It probably took me about, I'm going to say 4 to 6 months to get fully
Mhm.
credentialed with that first insurance that I pursued. And the name of that insurance isn't important, but it's more so about making sure and doing your research about who are the bigger insurance companies in your area, because that will inform, and especially this was well before the pandemic, that will inform um, you having a strong pool of people to be able to find you through their insurance provider network.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that there's a very, steep learning curve in terms of like a lot of the administrative process that goes into getting credentialed and contracting with a specific insurer, providing your malpractice coverage, completing a profile on this site that allows insurance companies to basically kind of review that you are who you say you are and things are up to
Mhm.
date. I also, as a private practice solo person, I think, I decided to kind of just start with one and I went based off one that was pretty dominant in our area. And a lot of the people in my community have that insurance. So I was like, let me start with that.
Mhm.
And I had found that really I only need one. And to your point, in terms of just the steady stream, I do think that that is the benefit of managed care is it does allow a steady referral process in some ways in terms of people who you're in network with. I do think you get a little bit more of a steady referral process. Now,
Mhm.
I know we've been talking about just the nuances with that. Do you want to share a little bit about referrals and maybe the component there?
Yeah. It's interesting. I want to acknowledge that we are recording this in mid-February, and that I've had this conversation a couple times about maybe kind of typical referral, the shapes of referral graph, if you will, in private practice. And somebody newer to private practice was exploring, is it normal? I feel like referrals are down. Is this normal for this time of year? And in my experience, what I've found is that, yeah, this time of year, people are coming off of holiday spending and maybe catching up on maybe use of credit cards or just refilling their coffers following holiday shopping. And while January and even early February, and for longer, depending on where you are in the country or in the world, but for us, those are some of the literally darkest months of the year. And so, believe it or not, seasonal affective issues can affect anybody relative to their environment. And so that's a big time where depression might be starting to escalate. But people might not have the financial resources to pursue therapy right away during that time because of that holiday spending, but also because deductibles often reset. Most people will have a calendar year deductible, a calendar year plan year, which means that their deductibles reset and their out-of-pocket maxes reset every January 1. And so that might also cause people to need to wait until maybe mid-February or really kind of even Marchish before pursuing a new therapy experience, as they kind of get their finances underneath them after the turn of the year.
Yeah. And that I think that's very connected with what research does show that cost related barriers, co-pays, session fees, deductibles are repeatedly identified as the top reason people delay or forego treatment.
Mhm.
So I think you're speaking to kind of what the research shows there that, you know, it
Always good to
becomes
get
a
that
barrier.
reinforcement.
Yeah.
I feel the need to say this as we talk about both of us, I think, just for us, what was right and good for us is that insurance was a way to get our own security in terms of steadiness of referrals, but it also is in alignment with our values for accessible mental health care. And I'm going to be very clear that accepting insurance does not close the gap of access. It helps. I do believe it helps, but there are a lot of people, as you pointed out, who don't have insurance and who then wouldn't be able to pay for therapy out of pocket, perhaps at the fees that an insurance-based practice like myself must charge. And so I wonder if this is an okay space to talk about understanding what our contracts say about certain kinds of things.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Speaking very generally, most contracts with your as a in-network credentialed and contracted provider, your contract is going to say something to the effect of you can't provide a sliding fee or an insurance, an income-based fee, or reduced fees generally, essentially, because the insurance is contracting with you to a discounted rate, right? Like as an insurance-based provider, we are discounting our rates to be in network with them. And I think that's an important piece to understand. And there's this concept, this is paraphrasing, of course, but essentially, if you're going to give other people a discount, you should give us that discount too, right? And so if we are discounting our rates with insurances from our full fee, which is what you should be doing if you are pursuing paneling, then to offer a discounted rate is, I don't know what the right words are here, but it's being unfair to the insurance company. Now, listeners might be in this place of like, unfair to the insurance company, that's big business. And again, for better and for worse, insurance is what it is. And we're not reforming it in this conversation. I'm just saying that this is kind of the way that we have to be thinking about it. So while insurance does not meet all gaps in access to care and financial needs, it's meeting some of them, and that's where I have to allow myself to let that be okay, or else I will not sleep at night, right? And so there are other resources that may help folks at lower fees or who are able to offer sliding fees. For example, folks who aren't contracted to insurances to not do that. So I like to think that by there being different kinds and different ways for those kinds, in terms of how we practice, that more gaps are being closed in the bigger picture. That's maybe the way that I think myself through it to feel at peace.
Yeah. It makes me think like the question kind of relating to like, how does your practice or anyone who's listening's practice address access issues or address access? And I think I do know like when you don't accept insurance, that there are other ways that people practice an ethical model in terms of a sliding scale or pro bono work or referral process. But, is it fair to say, I hear you saying that, there needs to be consistency with the fee that you're applying with insurance and the fee that you're applying to somebody who's maybe not using insurance?
That is exactly what I'm saying. And that's a contractual expectation that we have to keep in mind. What happens is that depending on, as a solo provider for you, that means that what you charge insurance is what you would charge somebody if they were paying self-pay. And that is what the rules are. As a group practice, because unlicensed therapists may not be able to, are not able to bill insurance because they're not credentialed, that may provide a way to serve a different part of the community in my area with different fees, because they are not contractually obligated to that insurance contract that I am or that other clinicians in my practice may be. So that's another way to think about it too, that there are lots of ways to close the gaps, but that will be dependent on what our setting is. And an individual solo provider might have just fewer options than somebody who has a different range of clinicians in the practice.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point.
Mhm. One of the things that this inquiry for insurance brought up and asked for explanation about was understanding something called third party carve outs. And I think this is a big point of confusion for folks in the field because they think, oh, I'm in network with X, Y, and Z insurance. I should be able to see anybody in network with them. And what we have all maybe learned the hard way, myself included, is that isn't quite exactly true. That there are different kinds of plans within those insurers that have different stipulations. And so I'll use some terms just for general education. There's PPO plans and there's HMO plans. And I'm going to talk about those more specifically. And there are some in between that. There's HPO, which is kind of an interesting one. And there are maybe some other, series of letter plans, but those are the big ones that we need to understand. And so PPO plans generally are directly managed by the insurer. Okay. And so another way to think about that is those plans have their mental health benefits managed the same way as their medical plan benefits. Okay. Through the same place. Some HMO plans can be offered differently. And this is where learning how to read a client's referrals insurance card or using different tools that are available to therapists for verifying benefits that are free and available to anybody with an NPI and all of that good stuff. But in certain HMO plans, but not all of them, can use what they call a carve out, which means that their behavioral health benefits are farmed out to a third party who manages claims, engages utilization reviews, and pays the claims. And what people don't often understand is that, one, being in network with the big overarching insurance plan or provider doesn't actually mean that you're in network with that third party. And so you might have to pursue individual credentialing and contracting with them. And two, that the rates that third party carve out pays is likely not going to be the same as what the primary insurance pays for those PPO programs. Okay. And that's something that a lot of people don't understand until they are forced to understand that. And that's everybody's individual decision to make for themselves about whether or not the discrepancy in those rates could be higher, may often not be, is sustainable for you, specifically related to, what your financial needs are, how that impacts you emotionally. We know that there can be a lot of countertransference for us therapist folk when it comes to the financial side of being a mental health care provider. And so that's something that everybody really does need to check in with themselves of, is that sustainable for you? And if it isn't, that's your right, and that's okay. So HPO, I'll say very briefly, I have had limited experience with this one, but it is sort of like a hybrid of an HMO and a PPO. And it was one of those where the client needed a referral to me from their PCP, but then after the referral was provided, I was able to bill the primary insurer just like I would a PPO plan. So again, just because, it's not, having an H in front of it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be an insurance third-party carve-out. It just means that you might need to make sure that you understand things explicitly. And so that is not clear. And we learn that by trial and error.
Carve out, when I think of carve out, I typically think of like carving out a piece of a pumpkin pie at Thanksgiving. And this is a whole different kind of carve out, and I do think maybe if you don't take insurance or if you do take insurance, this is where kind of catastrophic land can occur. I know that for me at least, it's like starts to spike up the anxiety in terms of like carve out, wait, what, and I think that is part of taking insurance is you do have to kind of learn this. And I would say you don't always have to know this from the first moment, but it's good to know. And I wonder, do you think it's fair to say, like, is it important to kind of be able to get each fee schedule for each plan? Do you think that's one way to really understand the
Yeah,
nuances in between plans?
absolutely. I mean, it's tough because often we can't get a fee schedule before we get credentialed and then contracted.
Mhm.
Understandably so. And insurance is a business and they want providers for their clients to make sure that their business is successful. So they may withhold, it's not withhold, but it's like you have to cross certain steps to get access to certain information. For better and for worse, I don't make the rules, it's just how it goes. And so sometimes it can be hard to know. Uh, but it's also you make a really good point that this feels like that jack-o'-lantern of sorts, carve outs and understand that it can feel sinister or taunting or something. But maybe one of the ways that we manage that discomfort of unknowns is practicing what we teach other people regarding finding a way to get cozy in that gray space of unknowing and find out the information that we need, right? And so what I mean is if I can be less put off by the unknown and perhaps my mindset is more, nothing has to be permanent,
Yeah.
right? That I can pursue contracting, credentialing and contracting. That's how it goes. You credential first and be validated and vetted as a provider, and then you get a contract. Um, I can go into that and it doesn't mean that I have to do that forever or that I can't leave and come back to it one day, right? I want to normalize that when we can say, oh, I can explore this and then I can make a different decision if I need to, that is well within the realm of reasonable. And so
Mhm.
if we can go into insurance thinking about it the same way, should anybody have that interest, I think that's an important reminder that just because we decide to take a chance on it doesn't mean that that we're married to it forever.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think, you reminded me of one of our colleagues who says, like, when you make a big deal out of something, it leads to poor coping. And I hear you like staying grounded in like this doesn't have to be a big deal. This can
Yeah,
be part of the experience that you're going to learn from as a managed care
absolutely.
provider.
Oh, yes. It takes me back. I had to learn this lesson in graduate school when it came to quantitative methods, second
Mm,
edition, or second course. I I was like, if I think that this is impossible, it's going to be impossible. That's how I knew I was destined to be a cognitive therapist. Anyway, in the weeds on there, but yes, yeah, I love that. If you make a big deal out of it, it's going to be a big deal.
yeah.
So, okay. So it leads me to another thing I wanted to talk a little bit about that I think is important for. Well, actually, I'm going to ask you, Dr. Bewley, will you share a little bit more about what you know about what might be a turnoff of providers pursuing taking insurance beyond the what ifs and the fear part of it or the ignorance part of it?
Yeah. Um, well, actually, I can give you some data on this. So there was a survey data from the American Psychological Association that highlighted the main reasons that private practice psychologists opt out of insurance. 82% cite insufficient reimbursement. 62% cite administrative burden, whether that's getting authorizations, audits, maybe paperwork, and over half cite payment reliability concerns, whether there's delays or clawbacks, which we're going to talk a little bit about. Um, and those factors sometimes make clinicians never, joining, it lead to them never joining panels or maybe leaving early, in their career from panels. So at least those are I think the main reasons why people opt out to not take insurance.
Yeah. Do you relate to any of those?
Yeah, I do. I do think like initially it was like, if the idea of like, one thing I was told about private practice is like, hey, you can write two sentences on your notes. You don't have to write anything in your notes. And I remember thinking like, oh, I don't know if that fits for me. Like, and I do try to take the approach of like keeping the frame. So regardless of if somebody's paying me privately or insurance, we're going to start on time and we're going to end on time. No one gets extra time. And
Mhm.
I think that the same way administratively, I'm going to treat my private practice or private pay, treatment plan or session notes the exact same as I'm going to treat my insurance. So to me, that helps ground me in terms of just being ethically informed and fair between all my clients, regardless of their, economic status.
Which is to which you are contractually obligated with that insurance contract, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely. You said something, I want to go back to it. You said documentation is the same regardless of how someone is paying,
Mhm.
or that you have found that space.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. That's so important because I've heard stories maybe similar about, notes or what documentation is required for what kind of payer, but also that you don't need to diagnose in private practice if it's a self-pay client.
Mhm.
And my reaction to that now is, what? And here's what I mean. If a diagnosis helps us understand what's going on with a client and informs treatment, then no diagnosis means there's no direction for treatment. If a diagnosis informs treatment planning, then what do people who aren't diagnosing do?
Yeah.
And it begs this question, is that an insurance thing? Or is that an ethical, by designation of my license thing?
Mhm.
And again, this isn't about anybody else but me and you and the way that we're choosing to think about it. And so I want to be fair about that. And I also think for me that no matter who is coming to see me and no matter how they're paying for their care, they're getting the full psychologist version of me. And that's going to look the same across all of these different variables. So I want to kind of bust out open some myths around that documentation piece. A di a more relevant or severe diagnosis versus like a Z code has a lot of responsibility to it for us as a provider, for the client, in managing that. But if that's what's accurate, that's going to be the most ethical thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, I guess how do you, given that 82% cite kind of the insufficient reimbursement, like what are your thoughts on that being such a majority perspective?
Sure. I mean, I think it would be inauthentic of me to say that I don't agree with that.
Hmm.
And here's how I cope with that reality. More people are getting care at a lower rate. And while I would love to perhaps have a different financial circumstance, for me, that would mean knowing that a lot of people didn't even have the opportunity. And so having more people have the opportunity for mental health care services and knowing that that increases my reach, that's how I reconcile that.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that I work unreasonable hours. It doesn't mean that I don't feel emotionally taxed at times. It doesn't mean that I don't feel resentful sometimes. And most of the time, I feel very fulfilled, which feels very cliche in this moment. And I feel like it'll work itself out in the bigger picture. And I don't know what that will be or what that means, but it's maybe just a mindset that helps me to feel less focused on reimbursement rates and more focused on quality mental health care.
Yeah.
I know that feels a little bit like a cop-out answer, but it's sort of the reality that I come to.
Well, no, I mean, I think we're both on the same page that, and I know colleagues who share this perspective that we don't believe that therapy or mental health treatment should be only for the wealthy.
Right.
And I think that that's something that if psychologists only take private pay, we are kind of trending in that now this becomes a privileged experience. And kind of
Right.
going back to the research earlier, there is such a mental health need in our country, in our state, that, I do think that there is some diligence that's needed to help out. And, in terms of like insurance reimbursement, at least from what the data shows, like uh 90837, which is like a 53 to 60-minute session, which is pretty typical for most
Hmm.
psychologists. The reimbursement for insurance typically falls 20 to 40% below a private pay fee, but the private pay fee varies by region, by payer, if you're living in a rural community versus a downtown city. So that, that can be very dependent on
Yeah.
a lot of factors.
Yeah.
But to your point, it's, maybe you're getting 60 to 80% of your rate, which is still a really expensive rate. And it's not like
Hmm.
we just need to stay in our lane and just, not think about a business side of it. But I do think we need to kind of ground ourselves in like ethical components to how we're trained as psychologists, and in terms of, you know, do no harm and respect for others and justice and all
The
those
human
things.
pieces. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. In a different forum, it's so easy to be the one to say, we have the right to have a good life. We have the
Mhm.
right to want to be valued and respected in how we perceive ourselves and how other industries perceive us, whether that be other medical professionals, insurance payers, and all the things. And I believe that. And I don't think this is about dishonoring that, but it is maybe about maybe another way to say that for me, and maybe you kind of you would ascribe to this too, that this is maybe a way that I practice social justice, which is inherently a part of psychology, in my opinion, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I I don't know if I've ever said it like that, but part of this is a true, just like kind of off the dome conversation and being present in it. And again, it may or may not, it doesn't mean that somebody else isn't doing social justice. It just may mean that they're doing it in a different way or in differently in the same kind of way that I'm doing it, right? So there are many, many different ways that this can be
Yeah.
done.
Well, and I mean, I primarily work with LGBT clients, and not exclusively, but there is a myth, a stereotype that LGBT clients are wealthier than the norm. And what research shows is that actually it's below the norm. So, or, the baseline of, I guess,
The average, yeah.
average income.
Hmm.
So this speaks very closely to my practice in terms of like being able to help people within the community that I want to help, who are already marginalized, not to have them be further marginalized in terms
Yeah.
of not have access to care.
Yeah.
I know there's some similar data on um, racial and ethnic minorities in terms of cost being a greater impact for
Hmm.
access to services, not to make a generalization there, but I do think that this is important in terms of ensuring that your practice isn't only for a certain sector of the community
Yeah.
that's maybe more privileged and higher
Yeah.
class, and not that their needs don't matter, but just being sure that, I think our values align in that way of wanting to be sure we can help as many people as possible across the spectrum of lived experience.
For sure. For sure. Absolutely. And what I will also say is, right, I have a PhD in psychology. I I uh, I'd like to think that I'm a bright person in the world. And these conversations about HMOs and PPOs and what it means and third party carve outs and how to understand the difference between credentialing and contracting and like even the conversation that we've had so far today is very complex. And
Mhm.
so if we're struggling with it with the level of education that we have, could we imagine what it's like for clients to navigate these things? And I'm not saying that they're not equally as bright and smart or educated. I'm saying that there's a spectrum of people, and some people are really can be really confused. And so if we don't understand, I think that really can be even a different kind of frustration for them too, because we can't explain it to them. And again, we don't have to be experts in it to have a general understanding, like I've shared today about maybe the differences between a PPO or HMO or HPO. But I don't know. I think that part of the compassion also, or empathy, comes in to it too, that I don't have to know everything, but I want to know enough to be able to help someone on the right track. And so anyway, I don't know where that came from, but I wanted to talk a little bit about something else that is important to this conversation that I think we've been navigating well, but that may also be a turnoff for people considering insurance something as an option for their practice, which is this concept of antitrust laws. And I recently had the opportunity to learn more about this. I think that there is like a fear, like, and it's maybe not ignorance. It's like well, there's, I don't know exactly what that means, but there's also a fear that I'm going to get in trouble by an insurance company because I've somehow breached the antitrust parts of my contract when I don't really understand what it is. And so I wanted to speak a little bit about that to try and diffuse some of the around it. And again, I am not an attorney, I am not an expert on this, but this is my understanding that I'm willing to share. Antitrust laws are essentially competition laws that are federal and state regulations designed to promote fair market competition. And fair market competition is what's the word I'm looking for? Is inhibited by anti-competitive behavior like monopolies and price fixing and other things that I don't know enough to tell you what they are. And so competition is everybody is kind of working independently and they set their rates. They, clinicians and insurance companies, everyone's doing that in their own, with their own process. But anti-competitive behavior is when people get together and talk about all of these specifics, which is in direct breach of most insurance contracts. And so people can be like, well, I don't want to get in trouble or sued, so I'm just not going to deal with it or have any part of it. I get that. I get that. But the thing is we can have the conversation that we're having here, education, clarifying of general understanding, and kind of conversations to understand even what antitrust is. But where it becomes tricky is if we are getting together to compare really specific notes about what psychologists are charging or what this kind of clinician is charging or what insurance is paying here and what insurance is paying there. And so there can be a lot of discomfort or anxiety around breaking the rules around that. And so what I would say around that is we're not breaking rules if we're not intentionally getting together to talk about these things to create a monopoly or to price fix or to inhibit fair market competition. And this conversation, in my understanding of that, is not doing that. But that's one of the reasons why it's not appropriate. That's one of the reasons why we can't talk about rates. It's one of the reasons that we are not privy to what every other person, what their fee schedules look like with the same insurance company. It's one of the reasons why we have a responsibility to our contractual obligation to disengage a conversation where that may be occurring. And in a recent space where we were talking about this, and I kind of had some things clarified, was be sure to do so in a public space in a way that makes it memorable, so that if there ever was a concern or an investigation, they were like, oh yeah, that Carrie Leavell, she literally dropped the mic and walked out. And I remember that noise. It's unforgettable. right? Like that would be your way of having evidence that you did do what you said that you did, which is disengaging a conversation where people were maybe trying to create a monopoly of sorts or price fix or compel an insurance company to change their rates in a specific way. So I know that that's probably clear as river water, but I guess depends on the river. Muddy Mississippi is the one I'm talking about. But hopefully that just begins a conversation to understand that that isn't a silencing law. It's a law to, again, promote fair market competition that would otherwise be considered a union, and we don't have that, right? And so then that's a formal term for a formal way that people may pursue change with certain kinds of things. And again, that's a very rudimentary understanding of what a union does, but I guess I just wanted to introduce that because if that was something that was really off-putting to folks, maybe understanding a little bit about the intent and about how to work within it, it might be less of a barrier for folks.
Yeah. No, that's good. And I think, I don't, unless there's like this urge to kind of develop a monopoly, I could see that a lot of people could kind of accidentally slip into a conversation that potentially could get them in, some river water or hot water.
Yeah.
Um, and I hear you just, talking about just the pieces that you need to just be thoughtful of and
Mhm.
considerate of. And it's helpful. I mean, as an insurance provider, I'm learning in the moment from you in this way. So
Sure. Absolutely.
all I can think about is the Mississippi River, though. I mean, and no shade to the Mississippi River, but I don't think it's the clearest
It's not the
river
clearest. It's
that
the
comes to mind.
it's not called the Muddy Mississippi for no reason.
It is a pretty river, though, for those who live by it, listening, if you're out there.
We're so thoughtful. We don't want anybody to feel excluded or offended or ostracized.
Yeah, I mean, if you have a river site, hey, it can be as muddy as it needs to be. It's still a river view. So,
It's bodies of water are very grounding. So
mhm.
yes. Yeah. So anyway, I think that we're kind of at a place you mentioned. I want to mention this real quick, just from a introduction standpoint, and then as we wind down for our time today, that this is going to be a Leavellism, and so this is how I understand these things, and I'd like to share an experience. Another thing that I hear a lot about from colleagues who are or are not in insurance provider is this idea of fear of clawbacks or having their money taken back. And I can't say that that's not a legitimate fear that I also hold, and that especially being a group practice, I'm not just thinking about that for my own income, I'm thinking about that for everybody else's. But here's a general distinction that I would encourage you to think about, anybody in the community, and then a general way that I operate, mindset, but also work-wise, that ties into what you've already discussed. So a recoupment, I use this language. I don't know what their language is, but I use this language. A recoupment is when an insurance company has made an error in overpaying you and they ask for it back. Okay. We might say, well, it was your error, so it's mine to keep. Unfortunately, that just isn't how it works. And so I recently had this issue where many claims in a big insurance transition last year were recently recouped because they were overpaid. We knew it at the time that they were not paying correctly because we keep track of that. And so it was a surprise because it had been about a year, unfortunately, but it wasn't maybe shocking. It was just disappointing or frustrating because my mind had already moved on from that.
Yeah.
So, you mail the check in and be done with it. But that's a recoupment. That's their error that they overpaid you, so they want the difference back. Okay. Clawbacks are words that we use, I think, on the clinician side, which means that somebody did that the insurance maybe did an audit and they determined that there wasn't adequate documentation or that the diagnosis didn't match the billing time codes that were being used or something. And that's based on somebody else somewhere doing their job. And this is how I think about it. Recoupments, they overpaid and that's their mistake, but we got to comply. Clawbacks is we made the mistake because we didn't do something adequately. And if that person is just doing their job and you're doing your job, meaning you're honoring diagnosis, treatment planning, having regular conversations with clients about treatment efficacy, outcome measurement, and discussions about when it's time to reduce frequency or maybe even go as needed or to close an episode of care because it's theirs to take on the rest of their way. That's what our job is as a clinician, right? As a psychologist. And so I think these words, we could go into the weeds with them, but if you stay in this place of, am I doing a solid ethical job for everybody, regardless of how or who's paying for their services, and you are attending to those things, that's ethical care. That doesn't have anything to do with insurance or not. Then that person doing their job is going to not call you forward on you doing your job because there's no need to. Okay. And sometimes, I will say that my experience with audits and clawbacks are minimal. And I don't know if that's luck of the draw. I don't know if that's because when it has come up, I have passed them well. But that's the mindset I take with that, so it doesn't feel scary. And I guess I would hope anybody who is an insurance-based provider adopt that. And if you're not an insurance-based provider and that feels like a barrier, reflect on, okay, how do you allow yourself to use experience to guide your way? And if it's too much for you, you can always leave. And if you know it's going to be too much for you, okay, you don't have to start. That's fine. But understanding these processes may help you have a better way to talk through why, right? So this is about maybe folks who take insurance being affirmed in that, or kind of making sure that they're understanding the process, but it can also reaffirm folks who decided not to, and that's okay too.
Mm-hmm. I feel like a theme of what we've talked about and what you're referencing right now today is that unknown can take us to really scary, catastrophic land. And if we can ground ourselves in, real understanding and experience, and, sometimes experiencing that through doing or learning from the process, then it can ground you in the middle and, keep you away from those what if fears. So another great point.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you. Well, I'm glad to provide it. Thanks to our community member who wrote into us, allowing us to kind of use their question as the focus for today's conversation.
Yeah. Well, we really appreciate you spending time with us and supporting this podcast. And, there's multiple ways you can reach us. So if this episode or any other ones have resonated with you, please take a moment to subscribe on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcast. Consider sharing it with a colleague, perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're willing, leave a rating or written review on any of the platforms that you follow us on, because that really makes a difference in helping the podcast grow and maybe us reaching other clinicians or other folks listening out there.
Mm-hmm. We're grateful that you're here. And we hope you think well, practice with intention, and we'll be here beyond the session. Until next time.